Yeah, very much agreed. I think it's awesome that SCG has chosen to make this event kind of a discount deal, or whatever you want to call it. Makes the whole value proposition of playing the tournament much more appealing, assuming that travel costs are reasonable, which they may not be for all of us.
Yes, and so we have our players here. We're following Alex Rubin for this portion of today. A very accomplished young player from the DC Maryland area, rocking Team of Rhinos today, and going to be facing off in a mirror this round. So lots of matchups in Modern that have more kind of complexity and nuance to them. How does this one go? Is it just whoever has the biggest crash emerges on top?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure. Certainly, both players have the ability to counter opposing crashes and the ability to clear opposing rhinos and kind of outsize them, or I guess trade with them with something like Fury. But I think it'll probably mostly devolve into a mid-range fest. Oh wait, sorry. It appears that it is not a Team Rhinos mirror now. The match changed. Uh,
Well, yeah, so we were scammed, and it looks like Alex might potentially be getting scammed as well. Elliott Garrou rocking the Rakdos scam today, or Rakdos Evoke if you are a professional copy editor. For the rest of us, Rakdos scam, and this is a matchup which, in my experience, I think is decently favored for the Rakdos scam side, but there is also a lot of play back and forth, and it is a very swingy matchup as well.
Yeah, very much agreed. I mean, I think the games are most likely to devolve into a mid-range grind fest after some thought seizing, some griefing, some various exchanges of cards. I think players are going to rapidly reach a state where they're kind of top decking, and we'll see who kind of emerges out on top of that.
Yeah, and the thing about the Rhinos deck in this matchup is all of its cards are kind of relevant. So its removal can line up well against the evoke creatures. Force negation, not a great card, but can tag a Feign Death on a Fury or a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, something like that. And then from the Rakdos scam side, you have to deal with the Rhinos, and those are going to be your first targets for grief, thought seize, effects like that. But then you have to kind of slog your way through all of the other cards as well. So yeah, a lot of back and forth, a lot of interaction from both sides here.
I mean, I think both players are likely to get a lot of top decks kind of throughout the game. So even if Rakdos Scam discards the initial Cascader or what have you, at some point, probably Rhinos will draw another one. They have 8, and 4/4s will enter the battlefield. Of course, it's not to say that Rakdos Scam can't answer those 4/4s, just that, like, that is something that we will probably see. Um,
Yeah, this is a matchup where it is unlikely that that turn one Ragavan or just making a 4/4 for you in on turn one unlikely to go the distance. You have to be prepared for a longer, more mid rangey game. Even though I think that this is more of a linear deck than a mid range deck most of the time.
yeah, that is fair. Certainly, Rhinos kind of straddles the line between unfair Cascade archetype and fair mid-range deck. I don't know. It's kind of in a weird middle ground. Um,
Yeah, with both of these decks, this is the fairest of all of the various different Cascade decks, and then the most linear or combo-esque of the various Rakdos mid-range decks. So you're kind of seeing both extremes meeting in the middle here.
and it looks like both players having kind of a slow start. I'm not totally sure, but it seems like the Irish game player might have mulliganed a bit, which certainly that deck is want to do. At least when I play the deck, I'm unwilling to keep a. I only keep a pretty narrow range of sevens, I would say.
Yeah, you want a hand that does something powerful. And the good thing about this deck, you have a lot of ways to do something powerful and a lot of different ways to do that. But you do have to be willing to mulligan aggressively in search of those fast starts. We do see our sponsor Drip here on the bottom right. And I do want to commend officially from the booth the Drip on display from Alex Rubin, signed Onslaught Woodford Hills into a signed Dissension Breeding Pool. No better way to draw that one up.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Although personally, I am a basic land bin gamer myself, but
Different strokes for different folks, I suppose. So a very slow start from both players here. Alex passing with 3 mana up, usually a telltale sign of a oncoming violent outburst. But Shieldred the Apocalypse making its way into modern here for the Rakdos Scam deck, and this is a card which is one of the defining cards in both Standard and Pioneer. Has also shown up in Legacy and Vintage. Modern is the one format in between where we don't really see that card make an impression too often. But it turns out a 4/5 with relevant text, actually a pretty decent lineup against a 4/4 Rhino theme deck.
very much agreed. And honestly, I'm not familiar with this particular piece of technology. I'm not sure if you have seen it. I haven't seen Shieldred much in the Rakdos game sideboards, but as an anti-Rhinos card, it seems absolutely excellent. I mean, you're probably going to get a Rhino trade with it. It's out of range of Fury, so any way you slice it, you're going to get 2 cards or a card and a half in the exchange. Not to mention that just sitting there and draining them for 2 every turn while you gain 2 every turn is pretty easy to take over the game. Um,
And the nice thing about Rhinos is, even if you are brickwalled on the ground like this, if Alex just attacks with his Rhinos, Elliott might feel priced into blocking, but then any of Violent Outburst, pumping those Rhinos and making two more cards like Fire Ice, Bone Crusher Giant, dealing 2 additional damage, and then yeah, we're just going to lead off here with Fury, so dealing 4, and I imagine more to come after that.
I
So
mean,
throwing,
Ellie,
yeah, throwing 3 cards into the void, but you will do that to get shielded off the board.
right? It's certainly a reasonable play of Alex to just like get the shielded off, get the damage in, put Elliott on a 2-turn clock. However, Elliott can't really be sad about having exchanged shielded for 3 full cards. I mean, you really cannot ask for much more than that.
And Elliott, a few turns late here, looks like he has a scam lined up in terms of Grief plus Undying Malice, but all of the relevant cards have left Alex's hand at this point, and going to be tough to just beat what Alex has on board here.
Wait a minute. Why didn't Alex attack and Violent Outburst on the shielded last turn?
That is a good question. There was no need to pull the trigger there right away, and because Elliott was tapped out, there was no possibility of any kind of a feign death, saving shielded in combat, anything like that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not totally sure why Alex chose to play the game out in that way. Although perhaps he was trying to kind of milk the maximum value of his cards, not wanting to lose any of his Rhinos like material, keep the creatures in play, and then kind of he had so many removal spells, not worried about exchanging them at a negative rate. But an interesting choice there for sure.
And taking a sneak peek at Elliott's list, this is a very unusual take on Recto Scam. We saw the main deck Shieldred. That is just the beginning. We have Rotting Regisaur as a 3-drop that can punk out some of those fair games, and Liliana of the Veil as well. So this is a list which is, it seems like leaning away from some of those linear combo aspects and going hard on just big stuff, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I mean, I think running Regisaur is likely to be excellent against Rhinos. I mean, the Rhinos deck has no non-damage based removal, so if you make a Regisaur, it's going to demand 2 cards one way or another, like maybe a Rhino and a Fury trigger, maybe a Rhino and a Bone Crusher Giant. Like somehow, some way, it's going to exchange positively. And also, if it just comes down on turn 3 and isn't answered, it's going to end the game in a hurry.
Yeah, Elliott rifling through a lot of different sideboard cards there, only some of which are legible to the viewing public. We're going to do our best as commentators to bring confirmation of that to you. A different Liliana, the last hope there as well. So this might be the kind of next level move if you think you're going to play against a lot of the Mirror or other Ragavan decks where some of these more grindy elements are going to do the job. We see Hidetsugu Consumes All on the checklist card there. That's a nice way to clean up a board of Rhinos. We'll see what other delights this deck list has in store.
Yeah, and I mean, I know these decks commonly have a number of Hidetsugu Consumes All and Engineering Explosives in the sideboard, usually to answer things like Hammer, Creativity, and Rhinos itself. Playing it main deck is unusual, but it does make a certain amount of sense between cleaning up Ragavans and the other matchups I just named.
And you really want explosives against Violent Outburst in particular. Hidetsugu Consumes All can try and deal with everything a turn later on, but that's at least 8 damage that's coming through before you have time to clear that up. So that is a matchup here where I'm sure Elliott wishes that he had some explosives in the holster there.
Yeah, very much agreed. It does look like Necromentia is getting boarded in, which can stop all Rhinos forever, although it is a 3-mana sorcery, so the Rhinos might already be down by that point.
Yeah, Necromentia against these Cascade decks of really any description is much better on the play than it is on the draw, where often they have done their cascading thing of some variety before you even have a chance to cast that card. So keen to see if Elliott actually leaves those in the deck going into game 3. He might have the attitude of, this is a matchup that they're here for, so I want them regardless, which you can get out on turn 2 thanks to Ragavan, or maybe you can delay the game to that point. But for the most part, relying on a 3-mana sorcery against Rhinos on the draw, not where you want to be.
Yeah, agreed. And I expect both players here to be boarding out any copies of Blood Moon they have had. Since they're both Blood Moon decks, the card looks pretty silly, which opens up a fair amount of space for whatever sideboard cards you want. That is, say, if you have 4 obvious blanks, it's easy to fit what you need.
Yeah, the funny thing about these Blood Moon mirrors is that the thing about Blood Moon is it can win games or seal games in matchups where it really has no right to. Against the Rhinos deck, maybe they just don't have the ability to fetch a basic forest, and then you lock them out of evercasting Violent Outburst. But that isn't reliable enough to be a feature of the post Cyborg games. But yeah, in game one, sometimes you are the Blood Mooner, and sometimes you're the Blood Moonee.
Yeah, agreed. I think the funniest thing about Recto Scam is when they have Blood Moon in play, stopping them from playing Dothy Voidwalker, since it's a BB card and requires 2 basic swamps to cast.
I did last weekend have my Motide opponent hit me with Ragavan, reveal my own Blood Moon, cast it against me, and then lock themselves out of casting the 2 counter spells that were in their hand. So not sure who the scam victim was in that situation, but I'll leave that one to the philosophers among us.
Certainly someone scammed someone. I don't think anyone would describe the interaction you described as just, fair default magic.
2 copies of Shieldred in its opening hand. Like this almost looks more like a souped-up Pioneer deck at this point. Your Rakdos midrange deck got a few new toys, as opposed to the Rakdos scam that we all know and love.
Yeah, agreed. The Pioneer deck plus Evoke Elementals, if you will. Looks like Alex Rubin's hand here is 3 lands, a Crash of Rhinos, Subtlety, the Shock, and Fury is the hand here.
Yeah, no actual Crash of Rhinos in Alex's hand. That would be an odd 8-drop to put in your deck here. But Crashing Footfalls alongside Subtlety, Fury, and Dead Gone. So these are the kind of medium hands that you almost feel obliged to keep as Rhinos, where you have no route to cascading on turn 3 just yet, but you have manual Footfalls for a few turns down the line, and you have a few lines of defense against what Elliott can put together. And Elliott displaying some drip of his own, one of those nice wood carving Kamigawa Swamps into a Junji Ito Thoughtseize.
Yeah, although this Thoughtseize does really make our coverage job difficult, especially if there are any of the black and white black and white all booby 1 cards in his deck. It makes it kind of very confusing, but
Yeah, I think it's a Junji Ito Thoughtseize, but if you told me it was something else, I would probably believe you.
What if I just told you it was Skrelv, the black and white Skrelv? Would you buy that?
It doesn't not look like Skrelv. I will give you that.
I do think in this matchup, games will sometimes go long enough that the natural Footfalls can unsuspend, and that isn't so bad. I mean, you're not happy to see it per se, but it's far from a dead card.
Yeah, I think the principle against these black midrange decks in most formats where you want to keep a functional hand, because whatever is the draw to your opening hand is like just get taken by a Thoughtseize or a Grief, and then put yourself in a position to have good top decks in the mid game. This is a hand which can do that. So even though it doesn't look inspiring, I think that's what Alex is going for. And yeah, we saw one of Elliott's sideboard cards in Necromancer just getting pitched to a Grief to, I presumably tag that top deck Violent Outburst.
It looks like no persist for the Grief here. So it's just a straight up 2-card Thoughtseize, which is fine since certainly Violent Outburst is going to be worth 2 cards, but definitely not exchange Elliott can be excited about either.
Yeah, and if this game does get to the point where that Footfalls is coming off suspend, Alex can also just start hardcasting that Subtlety and that Fury and have that full-on power going into the mid game.
But I think that's kind of what Alex plans to do with these cards, right? Like, Subtlety, I guess you can hit an Evoked Elemental in the early turns, but I think a significant part of the appeal in this matchup is that eventually it becomes a Flington Kavu, more or less.
Yeah, when you get to the point where Elliott is hardcasting his own Evoke Elementals, then being able to re-trump that with a hardcast Subtlety is a good place to be. So this looks like, I would assume, Favor of the Mirror Breaker, one of those checklist cards coming into play. There we go.
In all formats, Standard, Pioneer, Modern, Legacy, you name it, this card is everywhere right now.
Yeah, truly one of the best Magic cards printed in the last few years, and one that it took the community at large a surprisingly long time to become accustomed to. I remember when the card came out, it was, okay, this looks kind of cool, probably too slow for even, a format like Standard or Pioneer, and now it is dominating those formats and many more besides.
Yeah, very much agreed. I remember playing Standard turns where my opponents were playing red and had 0 Fables in their deck at the beginning of the format, which is pretty insane to think about now.
Yeah, I played an Alchemy Sayer Championship where the most successful teams had Fable in their deck, and one of those only was clued into the card because they got paired against a Japanese player on the arena ladder who beat them up with the card, and then they were inspired to try it themselves.
Well, that's excellent, honestly. The classic arena ladder tech, as it were. So Elliott in kind of a complicated spot here. When you get to Fable Chapter 2, you ideally want to pitch lands, but Elliott's land light and therefore doesn't have any lands to really pitch. So he's kind of in a spot of, well, do I want to discard my spells and risk drawing more lands I don't really need? Or do I just want to keep my spells even if they're medium? It's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, it looks like Elliott does just keep everything in hand. And that is a tension you run into with this scam deck, where in the mid game, you want to be building up towards Hardcast, Grief, or Fury, or Shieldred, I suppose. You need enough lands to support that. But then you also don't want to risk actually flooding out when you could be drawing towards something more relevant instead. So Hardcast Subtlety going to be taking that Shieldred. And now, tough decision for Elliott over where you want to put that back. So you know those pair of Rhinos are coming down next turn. Do you just want to untap and present the same Shieldred again? Doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world to me, but you might think that you need to break that emergency glass, go digging towards an answer for those Rhinos instead.
And Elliott might be playing to terminate one of the Rhinos and looking for a way to double spell. Currently, with exactly 4 mana between the Goblin token and the lands, there is no way to cast 2 spells on Elliott's turn. And so I think that's what he's hoping to achieve by bidding the Shieldred. Finding another removal spell, finding another land to play Terminate plus Lily, some sequence along those lines.
And Elliott does know about that Fury way back from the very first turn, and so there is some concern that if you play the Shieldred again, well then Alex can just attack, and if you block, well then the Fury can finish off the Shieldred and be a relevant threat sticking around in its own right. So the Shieldred is a little awkward here, but then I'm not sure what would not be awkward from this position. This is one of the strengths of the Rhinos deck, just really making it hard to play against.
Yeah, very much agreed. It's sort of darned if you do, darned if you don't. Like, the Shieldred doesn't seem good enough to win the game, but I also don't really know what winning the game looks like for Elliott from this point. He's very far behind.
Yeah, I think Elliott would need something like Engineered Explosives were that in his deck, but even that would leave a 3/3 double striking Fury and a 3/3 flyer to deal with, and both of those could just beat Elliott up instead.
Maybe like a consumes all, then terminate the Fury, then try to slowly grind things out with a flipped Fable. Something along those lines could maybe get Elliott back into it.
I guess that could work. You're seeing the issue with putting these more expensive finishers like Shieldred in the scam deck, though, I think, where we had the Shieldred kind of on time, and we had the option to redraw it again and had to decline that because it just wasn't going to be fast enough to clean this up. So I'm not sure where you necessarily want the Shieldred outside of these kind of grindier Ragavan mirrors, I suppose.
I mean, I have to imagine it's a decent card against Rhinos. Certainly worse if you expect all your opponents to have subtlety, but it lines up pretty well against the rest of the Team of Rhinos deck. Um, I don't know if I'd want a lot of them, but I think I wouldn't mind a Shieldred or 2 in this matchup.
Yeah, it's good in those positions where both players have traded off all their relevant cards and you just want to stick something. That is a very good something to have sticking around.
And I mean, something I think is pretty notable about the match we're currently watching is Elliott has yet to do the scam thing. There's not been a single instance of elemental, recur elemental, double grief you, double fury you, whatever. And look, if scam never does the thing, it's kind of an underpowered mid-range deck. Like, that's not why you play it. I'm not saying that you should never keep a hand that doesn't do it, but on the other hand, if you never do it and your opponent draws well, you're going to lose a decent amount of the time. I mean, that's just kind of how the deck works.
Yeah, there are good reasons that you don't see much generic Rakdos midrange in Modern these days. Still at the top of the heap in Pioneer, not so much in Modern.
Very much agreed. Rakdos midrange fair cards is not a Modern deck I would recommend anyone take to the tournament anytime soon. However, if you introduce the power of the double Thoughtseize plus 4/3 turn 1, then we're talking.
Yes, and we are back on screen, as we should be, back in our rightful position here, as Alex Rubin quickly dispatches Elliott 2-0 in the Rhinos versus Scam-ish matchup. We will try and bring you more magic here as soon as we can. In the meantime, Yeah, so Anurag clarifying for us, Liliana the Last Hope, not Liliana of the Veil, but have seen both scattered around these Rhinos lists. What would you be playing if you were registering for this 20k here in Charlotte, or for any other modern tournament at this point?
I mean, I think scam, to be honest. Uh, I mean, maybe that's a boring answer because I think you're also going to say scam, but I really like scam's spot in the metagame right now. I think that Blood Moon means that you kind of have a serious edge against Amulet, and as well as a variety of other decks. It lines up pretty well against the Omnath decks. And I think the main exploit for scam historically is Hammer, which is currently being oppressed by the rise of Amulet. Hammer has an almost unwinnable matchup against Amulet. It's really bad. Game one is tough. They have a bunch of Masejus, and then they board in good hate on top of that. So I don't. If Hammer doesn't exist, or if Hammer is less popular, then I don't see why you shouldn't play Scam. Like, I think Scam is not bad against almost anything else, to be honest.
I think the narrative was that Scam is bad against Motide. That was not my experience. I think you can tailor towards that matchup and have that be pretty competitive. And my experience over the past few months is both Amulet and all of the other cool modern decks that I want to try just getting chewed up and spat out by a Scam. And so eventually, once you lose that much to a deck, you gain a lot of respect for it over time. And at some point, you think, I should beat them, or rather, I should join them because I can't beat them. And that's how I wound up playing Scam last weekend, and would probably play it again if I was playing here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think my backup answer, like if I was banned from playing Scam, is that I would play a Breach deck, probably Jeskai Breach with Grinding Station. But my go-to plan A would be just simply play Scam. I just think it's incredibly well positioned at the moment.
So my question for you is, you used to be one of the go-to authorities on 4-color Yorion, one of the biggest boosters for that deck. That is not 4-color Yorion anymore. They don't let us play with that card. But we do see these different takes on 4-color Omnath cropping back up again. But I know you are markedly more skeptical of those than you were of 4-color in the past.
Well, here was my legitimate experience. So in the past, when I was playing those Yorion decks, I felt like when I went long against anything, I would always win. Because eventually, I'm going to pick up Yorion, I'm going to play it, I'm going to draw 4 cards. That's game, kind of no matter what's going on, no matter the life totals, game over. Since the banning of Yorion, my experience is that I'm not sure you always win the late game against these low to the ground expensive iteration decks like Murktide or Fair Breach. I'm not even sure you always win the late game against Scam, which is deck that top decks pretty well. They have Seasoned Pyromancers, you have Omnaths, things trade back and forth. In the end, I think it winds up being pretty close. And when I started losing the late games to those decks, I was like, okay, so like maybe my deck is a 55% favorite in these matchups. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's a coin flip. And if that's how the deck is, then what am I beating? Like, what's the point of this? Like, the reason Yorion existed historically was to prey on Ferragwan decks. If it doesn't beat Ferragwan decks, I think it's kind of just 45% against everything, is my opinion.
We do have more magic for you here. Rhinos again in the hands of Damon Christian against Zach Allen, a player very familiar to anyone who was watching or playing in the SCGs back in the day. I know someone from your home turf back in Michigan. On this Fair Breach deck, which is a departure from his usual style, I would expect to see him with some kind of reactive blue deck full of expeditions and other cards that are hard to pass on camera. But maybe taking a cue from Corey and Ross and others, just going with the Fair Breach option this time around.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say about Modern right now is I do think Scam is the best positioned deck, but I think the best card in Modern at the moment, there's a case to be made that it's Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach is really messed up. It's Yogg Will. It remains legal. Play a Breach deck. I mean, hard to go wrong with that sort of attitude. Also, I will state that while Zach is best known for playing Blue-White Control, he did actually play Merc. You might be lost. Okay, I don't know what to do about that. Hmm.
Well, if audio is gone, they can't hear us not knowing what to do about the audio being gone. So we will just talk into the ether and hopefully they will hear our dulcet tones once again before too long.
Okay, sounds like we're back. Yeah, but okay. Without reiterating too much, it seems like players have got some opening hands for us here. Uh, all right. It seems that no one has a turn one play in this particular game. Rhino's just going for a Triome. Makes sense. Rhinos obviously can't play any one drops except for the weird Dead Gone due to needing to play all cheap spells for Cascade. Or sorry, all expensive spells for Cascade. And Zach does not have a DRC or a Ragavan here, and is just forced to pass the turn on one. Probably kept the hand with Ledger Shredder, that means, as the threat, since it's hard to construct a keep that doesn't involve a one drop or a Shredder, I would guess.
Yeah, the both decks do have some amount of one mana interaction for opposing play. So Dead Gone for your Ragavans, or for Zach Allen's side, you have cards like Unholy Heat and Lightning Bolt. If the opponent has a turn one threat, in the absence of any of that, then yeah, you're going to get a slower rhythm to the game here.
At this point in time, Zach shouldn't. Oh, this is game two. So sorry, both players do know what the opponent is playing. It's also possible that Zach kept some sort of counter magic heavy hand, anticipating the Rhinos. I know that Fair Breach doesn't play any counter magic in the main, but I believe they typically have some in the board, and probably whatever they have would come in here.
Yeah, you sometimes see some spell pierces main deck or something like that, but this is one trade-off that you make with Fair Breach as opposed to classic Murktide is you have that universal answer like counterspell that can deal with whatever the opponent is bringing to the table. You kind of have to do your own thing and hope that's good enough.
Yeah, and I imagine that against Rhinos specifically, where Spell Pierce is sometimes one mana, destroy two 4/4s in some sense, that playing Fair Breach as opposed to Murktide is a loss, not a win. I'm not saying there are matches where you'd rather be on Breach. I just think this probably isn't one of them.
I would expect as well in these post-cyborg games, Zach to have something to do for one mana, whether it's Spell Pierce, like you mentioned, Flusterstorm, Minor Misstep even, cards in that vein, or do their work against Rhinos.
That's true, and I don't personally. I think I am a hater and a doubter on the card Minor Misstep, but I know some players I respect have been singing its praises for a while now. I'm not sure where Zach falls on this question, but I wouldn't be shocked to see that from him here. And obviously, it's excellent against Rhinos.
That was one of those classic spoiler season debates of is this card the second coming? Is this card unplayable? Is it maybe a secret third thing? As it turns out, I think the initial hype was a little bit overblown, but you do see it pop up from time to time, so it's not completely absent from the format either.
Hmm. This game taking a really kind of slow pacing here. I mean, we saw Dan Christensen kind of tap Zach out and then still not do much of anything with that turn. I suspect both players are holding a counter magic. That's what I have to imagine for this kind of game state to make sense.
I wonder from Damon's side, would you even want a card like Force Negation in your deck post sideboard?
Good question. Typically, I think I would be inclined to board out Force Negation against these sort of fair decks. Just go for a long, grindy game and not try to 2-for-1 myself too frequently. 3 mana negate, obviously a mode of the card, but a pretty anemic one. Uh, that said, keeping in a few to answer opposing Underworld breaches or to try to get through your own Rhinos, I could see it, but I would lean towards having them out. So, but that makes kind of the lack of action here all the more confusing, I think.
Here's another card which gained a lot of excitement and then dwindled down a bit in Third Path Iconoclast. So, Zach playing that, playing a Mishra's Bauble immediately, getting a trigger there, having it picked off right away with the dead half of Dead Gone. So, leaving a motley 1/1 as the only thing to show for that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think in this deck, Third Path Iconoclast makes a fair amount of sense because the Fair Breach decks these days have often cut even the Singleton Grape Shot. So when they kind of have these big go-off turns with DRC, Breach, and Bobble, there's not really an outlet. Like they cast a bunch of Bobbles, and the payoff is, well, they draw some cards. There's no kind of immediate board impact. And Third Path Iconoclast is an individually reasonable card that happens to make those combo turns all the more impactful, which I do like.
Yeah, at the time, the go-to breach deck was the grinding station deck with Urza Saga and so on. And in that deck, you already have so many two drops, and it's a little hard to cast alongside Urza Saga, so never found its way in there. Now that we have this different breed of fair breach decks popping up, it does seem like a more natural fit in that shell.
Very much agreed. Yeah, I think uncastable saga is kind of a deal breaker. Mm.
Yeah, someone in the chat asking why there's a Pokemon on the board. In case you have been living under a rock for the past few years, we are esports now. We have Lord of the Rings cards popping up. We have a lot of these different crossovers, and Pokemon is only a matter of time. So get used to it now.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't want to attack with a nice Charizard plus Gimli? I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, you could have like a Charmeleon card, which would be a lot like Charmeleon. The actual answer in this case is that that's just what Zach is using as a token. And that is maybe one of the main routes to personal expression in Magic at this point. Is just what you choose to use for your various 1/1s and 2/2s and so on.
Hmm. Right. So the Gatesville does get flustered, and Damon is basically just reduced to suspending another footfalls and passing. It appears. I suspect Damon might have some removal in hand, but just waiting for a better target than this kind of dinky 1/1. Although, if his life total dwindles too far, might just have to pull the trigger on that.
Yeah, 11 turns down the line, we might feel the need to pull the trigger on that one. For now, though, Zach is going to present a Dragon's Rage Channeler as an additional threat, followed up by Expressive Iteration, triggering Surveil. And that one is going to get somethinged. That
I think it's
is
Mystical
a...
Dispute.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that is the RC promo Mystical Dispute.
You are correct,
And
yes. And so a little unfortunate here that Zach gets that disputed when, had he just not cast a Channeler, then would have been able to pay. Paying means your iteration gets worse, so not clear how bad of a trade-off that even is. And Zach is willing to fight over this here and get those pair of Surveil triggers in return.
well, I think Zach is probably kind of sniffed out at this point that Damon does not have any more Cascaders in hand. So, given that, Damon doesn't have any kind of other premium targets for those counter spells. So Zach is happy just to spend them for a nice, easy 2-for-1 in the mid-range fight. Other than killing 2/4/4s, I think this is about the best he can do.
Yeah, eventually you have to wonder, what else are you going to use these cards on from either side? And this seems like a good fight for both players to pick, even though in one sense it is kind of zero-sum.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, iteration is sort of like making two Rhinos if you squint, you know? It's just the Rhinos come in the form of a DRC and a, card in hand.
It is a little bit like that. I've seen things that it is a little bit more like as well, but I will give you that one. That's fair.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's the most like Rhinos, just a bit like Rhinos, if you will.
It's not wholly unlike Rhinos.
Yes. So,
So that footfall's slowly ticking down towards a natural resolution. Don't think it's going to get there at this rate unless Damon has ways to deal with this pretty imposing board from Zach. We went from a singular 1/1 to a pair of 3/3 flyers, and that's going to end the game in short order here.
yeah, I mean, one card that could really help Damon out here is Endurance, which is often played in the sideboard or main deck of Rhinos in some number. Endurance here would obviously shrink both DRCs down to size and then eat one in that same combat step, assuming it resolves. I don't know if Damon has any of those specifically. However, if he did, he would certainly just pass the turn like that, try to look dejected, sell it a little bit.
Yeah, roll your eyes, just make some kind of mini tantrum motions with your hands. You can really hammer it up if you want to. But Endurance is a card that Zach needs to have on his radar. Basically a staple in every Rhinos list, and definitely a card you would bring in this matchup. So definitely a card Zach will be weighing up. As to whether he needs to respect it, well, that's a wholly different question. He decides to just send all of his creatures into the red zone anyway here.
He has no choice on the DRCs. So
Well, yeah, so that 1/1 though comes along for the ride, and at the point where an Endurance would be gobbling up a DRC anyway, then you may as well just send that one in there too. And so going to grow the board even further here with a third path iconoclast. And at this point, Zach has to feel the coast is clear, where no endurance mid combat probably means no endurance at all. And unclear what Damon can really do to get himself out of this position. I guess Hardcast Fury would be a good start, but not actually close to enough at this point.
Right, and part of the problem is we sort of know whatever's in Damon's hand isn't very good, right? Like, if Damon had a rule spell there, he would have cast it. If he endurance, it would have cast it. Most sorceries he would have played on his last turn. It sort of seems like his hand has to be lands or non-creature counterspells, and that's kind of it. And that means even if he top decks Fury, I don't see the path to victory.
Yeah, Damon pondering his top card here for a while. But yeah, looks like that is not going to be enough. So Zach Allen going to pick up this match against Rhinos, move on to 4-1 here in our tournament. And there's still fair few rounds to go both today and tomorrow, but Zach looking in decent shape here.
Yeah, and sorry, what we just saw was that 3 Force of Vigors flashed in the Rhinos player's hand at the end of the game?
Well, this is